Get started. Okay, it's 10:02 and we want to get it on time and finish on time. So thank you very much for joining us, and whoever's going to join later will just pick up. So good morning. My name is Aviv. I'm the Vice President of the International Relations and Business Development here at the Federation of Israeli Chamber of Commerce. And we're happy to be here on webinar that was dedicated for mostly for the diplomatic corps, for the commercial consulates and ambassadors and representatives of foreign embassies here in Israel, where we wanted to kind of give a short update on different regulatory and import regime change, and we're going to focus today on, we're going to talk in broad, but we're going to also focus on recent aspects that was happening in the wireless regulations. And in general, I think for those of you who don't know the Chamber of Commerce, so we're a lot of our interaction with you is mostly trade-based and trade facilitation, where we're doing B2B or different aspects of business, helping the export of a lot of the respective countries that are here into Israel, mostly on the trade issues and the B2B, whether it's delegations, etc. But we also are very active. I mean, maybe that's our core business, where we're very active in economic policy and advocacy, and obviously in all the issues that are related to import procedures, regulations, and trade. The Federation is really the oldest and biggest business association in Israel. And our main work is trying to ease up the regulations and bureaucracy in Israel for the private sector, for the private business owners. And we're trying to do so. It's not as easy. I think in every country it's not as easy. There's a lot of issues that you need to it's a lot of uphill battle, but we're doing it. And mostly, and recently we're doing it much more successfully, I think. There's a lot of issues that we're doing with the regulations, and you need to be up to date. So we decided to try to make it a thing that we're going to try maybe once every quarter or in a few months to convene this forum and to try to give you different updates. This is an open forum, so feel free to ask questions, feel free to participate. You all been to Israel for a long time, so you know that it's rude not to interfere, not to ask questions, so feel free to do so. And I'm just gonna say thank you to Sharon Memerstein, who works with me, who organized everything, both the logistics, the content, and everything, and obviously to Raz Hillman and Merav, and to our guest speakers today that are that really we appreciate the fact that they came in and took their time to present today. So let me just introduce them. So the first speaker will be Raz Hillman. He's the VP Customs and Import and Standardization at the FICC, followed by Alexandra Oni, the Director of Standardization Policy and External Affairs in the Standardization Administration in the Ministry of Economy and Industry. Thank you, Alexandra. Good to see you. And followed that is Mr. Itai Roth. He's the CEO of Netzigim Laboratory, and he's going to focus a lot on the data wireless regulation. So, without further ado, I just want to pass on the mic to Raz, and we can get started. Raz, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Zev. Okay, so I will share with you a very short presentation. My name is Raz. I work at VP Customs, Import and Standardization at the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm actually getting paid to remove trade barriers. So I consider you partners, and I hope that you can find me as a partner also in that. Having said that, what I actually mean is that if you encounter any trade barrier to Israel, whether it's a private, small incident, small issue which needs to be looked at, you can contact me. And surely, if it's something which is more wide and can be of interest for many, many Israeli importers, anything like that you encounter, you're more than welcome to contact me, and I will do my best to help. Okay, so now I will go through about removal of trade barriers to Israel. And I will start with the social protest of 2011. We're just 10 years ago, and it was a very, very big protest, and it wasn't about war. It wasn't about peace, and it wasn't about government corruption. It was about the cost of living. And this protest was very, very, very significant, and it made the government think. It made the government establish a few committees that looked into this very, very complicated issue of cost of living. And all these committees, what they had in common, that they all mentioned import efficiency, competition from import as something which is crucial to dealing with the cost of living in Israel. And that has gave us a lot of support to promote our agenda on removing trade barriers. Okay, so about the non-tariff barriers to Israel, we have two categories of these non-tariff barriers. The major one is the method of enforcement. In Israel, if you want to import a product, many of the requirements are being inspected during the import procedure, which is very, very complicated. And I guess that in your countries, in many of your countries, it's not the way that they enforce the regulation. Most of the countries we've been in touch with enforce the regulation on the retails. Okay, the second one is the requirements themselves. Unfortunately, some of the Israeli requirements aren't aligned with the requirements in many of the developed countries that we work with. Okay, so now I will go through a very partial list of non-tariff barriers that were removed during the last decade. I will start with food. Okay, food is very, very important to everybody, and it's important to the business sector. And in 2015, a very, very significant reform passed in the Israeli parliament. It's called the cornflakes reform. This reform makes it very, very easy to import non-sensitive food to Israel, meaning cornflakes, pasta, chocolate, and many, many other products. This reform also indicated that while the Ministry of Health is making decision about his requirements on food, he has to take into consideration the relevant requirements in the developed countries. So this reform dealt with both of the major problems. First, the method of enforcement, and second, the requirements themselves. The method of enforcement is already passed totally, and the requirements themselves are still, we are still fighting with the Ministry of Health to have more and more requirements be aligned with what is accepted abroad. Another thing regarding food is that 2 years ago, we managed to expand the non-sensitive food list. So now more categories of food can be imported rather easily through this declaration procedure, rather than having to accept an approval for every food you want to import to Israel. Okay, about mandatory standards, you will hear more from Alexandra, but I will just tell you that in Israel, it's a very, very unique situation where you have the Standard Institute of Israel, who is a monopoly on testing imported products. And only in 2018, a reform passed, making it possible to compete with the SII. And today we have some private laboratories that compete, and I believe you will hear about it from Alexandra. We also have a change in the way the law for standard refers to national deviations. Because national deviation, if in Israel we decide that we want something to be different than the adopted standard, it makes it very, very difficult for the Israeli importer to find the products he needs to put into the market in Israel from many potential suppliers. And if the standard has no national deviation or very little national deviation, it is much easier. And in this reform, they made it very clear that the national deviation shouldn't exist. And if they exist, the committee that write these standards need to be very, very specific why this national deviation is needed. And for these kind of national deviation that aren't needed, in order to put them into force, today the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance need to sign that they approve it. And that has made a very, very big effect on the people sitting in the committee who write the standard, and they understand now much better that they need to be very, very careful about making a national deviation that might be a trade barrier. Okay, about the method of enforcement, you will hear probably more from Alexandra, so I will not go into it now. Energy efficiency reform, that's regulation that is relevant to products such as refrigerator, air conditioner, and many other home appliances, electric home appliances, which need to, you know, if we speak about energy and we want to reduce the energy consumption in Israel, these kind of requirements are very, they make sense, but they weren't aligned with the requirements in other developed countries. And the methods of enforcement in this issue is also based on the import procedure, and they didn't allow for the importer to make a declaration that his product is in compliance. In this reform of 2020, these two issues were dealt with, and as of, I hope, next year, it will be possible to import products that need to be in compliance with this regulation based on importer declaration, and the regulation, the requirements themselves will be aligned with the requirements in developed countries. The last one I will speak about is the Wi-Fi reform. You will hear more about it from Itai, but it's also a reform dealing with the problem of method of enforcement and moving from checking every product that you want to bring into Israel, getting an approval for every product, going to ways that you can declare, and now importers can choose, and if they want, they can declare that the product is in compliance. It's their responsibility to make sure that it is in compliance, and then they can get the approval rather automatically. Okay, so you will hear about it more from Itai soon. About tariff barriers. So also as a result of the social protest, many customs were reducted starting 2012. Later on, many food quotas were put into force for beef, dairy products, olive oil, fish. There were 2 tariff reductions for fish, and the netto programs. These are programs which abolished purchase and customs tax on many consumer products. And I think that if you look at the customs in Israel today, it's when you compare it internationally, you see that the customs aren't a big issue, except for food, which is a very complicated issue. Okay, so what next? Removing more tariff reductions are still on the table, and I know the people at the Ministry of Finance are looking into it, and there sure might be more tariff reduction both in food and in non-food products. And about the method of enforcement and the requirement, the non-tariff barriers, we have the sensitive food reform that we're working on. We have the cosmetic reform, which is on the table, and maybe another standard enforcement reform. I don't know if Alexandra will go into it, but I know that the Ministry of Finance isn't pleased yet with the current regulation for standards, and he wants some more reform, and he wants it to be more easy to import to Israel products which formal standard applies on them. So I will end with that, and I will repeat calling you to let me know if you encounter any trade barrier to Israel, and I will be happy to help. Thanks.
Wait, thank you, Raz. Thank you very much for this basically opening and setting the stage for the rest of the event. And I just want to reiterate a few things of Raz. So Raz is our colleague at the chamber, and it's really he and Merav, just raise your hand so everybody can see you. So they're doing a great job, and as he mentioned before, he's getting paid to actually reduce NTBs and barriers and tariffs and everything. And we have very strong representation, both in the Standard Institute, but we also work a lot with the ports and the customs and all the different entities, and obviously in all the different government bodies, whether it's the Ministry of Communication, Health, Agriculture, etc., etc. So we work with them on a daily basis, and we can really help promoting different initiatives that are coming from your end. So please feel free to share it with us if you're getting any issue from any Israeli importer or businessman. And I also want to try to encourage you to definitely ask questions and raise your hand or participate, or you can just unmute yourself if you feel like, and really feel free. It's a very informal kind of like forum, so just feel free to kind of ask questions whether now or moving forward. So I just want to introduce Alexandra. Here you go. Alexandra, you can share your screen while I'm introducing you. So Alexandra is she started in the Foreign Trade Administration, used to be a commercial counselor, and now she's the director of the Standardization Policy and External Affairs, and we want to hear from her about the import of products under mandatory standards. So Alexandra, take it away.
Okay, are you hearing me? Great.
Loud and clear.
So hello everybody, my name is Alexandra Ronin and I'm responsible for standardization policy and external affairs at the Standardization Administration in the Ministry of Economy and Industry. In my presentation, I'll go through the standardization in Israel, mandatory standards, conformity assessment, and the import regime in context of the technical regulations. A few words of national quality infrastructure in Israel, which is pretty similar to others of the developed countries. Here you see that there is an existence of separation of authorities. We have technical regulations, which are done by governmental authorities. We have standardization, which is done within the public technical committees of the Standards Institution of Israel. Conformity assessment is represented by the laboratories of Standards Institution of Israel and many others private laboratories, testing laboratories. Accreditation is done by ISRAC, the Israel Accreditation Authority, and the physical laboratory, national laboratory in Israel is responsible for national primary standards. So who is responsible for the pre- and post-market surveillance of technical regulations? The enforcement is under the responsibility of each ministry that published them. The Commissioner of Standardization enforces mandatory standards with a few exceptions. In general, Ministry of Health is responsible for food standards, and the Ministry of Infrastructure is responsible for fuel and house gas appliances. So this scheme reflects the concept. Standardization in Israel is regulated through the standards law. By the law, the SII is the only standards developing body in Israel. The standards are elaborated by the TCs, technical committees, and all of them are born like voluntary standards. After that, the institution circulates each draft standard for a public consultation. So on this stage, every one of us and you may take part in this stage of public consultations. There are two ways to change the status of a standard from voluntary to obligatory. The one way, by the standards law, when the Minister of Economy and Industry may declare a particular standard, an entire standard, or parts of the standard to be mandatory after consultation with all stakeholders. And another way, other authorities, governmental authorities, may mention a certain voluntary standard in their technical regulations. In this case, we call such standards obligatory in the framework of a particular regulation. So in general, we have in Israel about 3,600 standards, voluntary standards. Among them, we have 640 mandatory standards. And among these 640 standards, 150 are food standards. The mandatory standards cover most consumer products which have safety aspects, for example, childcare equipment, child's high chairs, walkers, and so on. and other consumer products such as lighters, leathers for domestic use, household electrical appliances, and more others. There is a list of 46 standards which require bearing of an obligatory standards mark. But this requirement is enforced only for domestic manufactured products, so it doesn't affect the imported stuff. So who may perform the conformity assessment procedures to standards? Compliance testing, both for domestic and imported products, is generally carried out by one of the SII laboratories and other private testing laboratories in Israel who hold the approval or recognition certificate from the Commission of Standardization to carry out the test and issue the compliance certificate. Okay, the main legislative piece in context of technical regulation is the free import order and its annexes. This order states that the importation of goods is free to Israel except for the goods specified in the first and second annexes. So the first annex of this order is a list of customs positions that require an import license. The second annex is the list of customs positions requiring the import confirmation, compliance with conditions. And here you see an example of the second annex. A customs position, a short description of a product, and the mandatory standards which covers this product. A product also needs to comply with technical requirements included as technical regulations and orders issued by other ministries and governmental authorities. All imported goods which are subject to mandatory standards under Annex 2 of the Free Import Order are classified into 4 levels of the examination according to the degree to which they might endanger public health and safety. The goal of creating these groups was to ease the inspection burden on imported consumer products and to shift the emphasis of enforcement to inspection at the post-market stage. So for goods in Group 1 with highest level of potential risk, what is needed? It's needed a short examination of each shipment and a certificate for the type of the product. And of course, a technical file for the product type. The second group of the medium level of potential risk, all the goods under this group are subject of type approval tests and importer's declaration that the goods in each shipment are identical to the authorized type and conform to the relevant mandatory standards. And of course, it is needed to have a technical file. The third group with low level of risk, where goods must be accompanied only by the certification, the importer's declaration of conformity, and the technical file. And in each case where we're talking about technical file, we're talking about the file where the requirements are very similar to those of the EU. It should include all the information defining the product and its compliance with the mandatory standards requirements. And Group 4, where imported goods intended solely for industrial use, so they do not need undergo any special inspections. The most recent reform is transferring of dozens of standards from Groups 1 and 2 to easier path. Like a number of developed countries, Israel applies the presumption of conformity approach. It places more responsibility of supplier, including manufacturer, importer, distributor. Those shipments must be accompanied by a personal declaration that the goods conform to Israeli mandatory standards. As you see, before the reform, the Group 1, there were 235 standards, and after the completion of the reform, there will be 167 standards. The rest will go to Group 2, and the standards from Group 2 will go to Group 3. So a few words in regard of international cooperation in recognition of conformity assessment procedures. Israel already have several mutual recognition agreements, MRAs. The first MRA was a good laboratory practice agreement with the EU since 2000. Israel and the EU have MRA on acceptance of conformity assessment, ACA, on GMP, in pharmaceutical. We have two MRAs with Canada and USA on conformity assessment procedures for telecom equipment. Both of them are in force since 2013. Israel is a part of CB scheme, IECEE CB scheme. The approved laboratories in Israel are encouraged to sign B2B mutual recognition agreement between conformity assessment bodies. The SII has a long list of such agreements, and we would be grateful if you may transfer this message to conformity assessment bodies in new countries to encourage them entering into such agreements with Israeli laboratories. And in this stage, I will go through the all governmental authorities who influence the import regime in context of technical regulations, just in few words. You see the list of all the ministries who has its own technical requirements in the import stage. We have the Minister of Economy and Industry with the standardization administration who is responsible for mandatory standards. Administration of diamonds is responsible for import of diamonds. Weight and Measures Division is responsible for importation of industrial and commercial weights. Foreign Trade Administration and its import division is responsible, it manages the free import order with all the amendments to it. The Minister of Agriculture, of course, is responsible for fishery and plant protection, fodder, etc., and also for importation of agricultural machines and vehicles and its parts. Minister of Health is responsible for pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, medical devices, and it has a special national food services who is responsible for importation of foods. Minister of Transportation is responsible for importation of vehicles and spare parts. Minister of Environmental Protection responsible for importation of radiation materials and hazardous materials. Minister of Communication for manage spectrum and frequency licensing. And Minister of Energy and Water is responsible for energy effectiveness marking on electrical appliances. Okay, a few words about the contact points or focal points in Israel. In our standardization administration, we have the WTO TBT inquiry point, and each of you are invited to call and to address this inquiry point, any question and any issue on technical requirements in Israel. And we have also the Import Policy Division, who is responsible, I also said it, on a free import order, and also to solve all acute problem in the import stage. So all these addresses are for you and for your use, and we welcome any question that may came from you and from your exporters who is importing to Israel. That's all, and now you are invited to ask any question.
Great. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you for this very informative deck and for your kind words. There is one question that I want to just maybe start with, and we'll take it now. And also, Raz, if you would want to comment to that, that would be great. So, Gil is asking if there's any English translation for the all mandatory standards.
Yeah, I see this question. The answer is yes. The most mandatory standards of Israel are the adoption of international standards, mostly of EU standards. Part of them are American. So the base of Israeli, in this case, the base of Israeli standards is foreign standard, like the EU standard. And in any cases, we translate the national deviations from Hebrew to English. So, you know, the standards are the international property of standards institutions. So you may call them or address this question to the portal of a standards institution and to purchase the standard in English.
Okay, thank you, Alexandra. Raz, do you want to add to that?
May I ask you questions?
Yeah, I just want to maybe just let Raz just finish the...
Many of the standards adopt international standards. So many times for many standards there aren't national deviation. So at least for those products, if the Israeli standards refers to an international standard, the main thing to know is to look for that international standard. And I believe that you know that international standards also aren't available for free online, not all of them, unfortunately. But there is the possibility to look into it in Israel and to buy this standard. So you can have the alternative. But what I'm suggesting to you, because it's so complicated and there are so many standards, that if the manufacturer that you represent has a problem, most of the time the importer in Israel could help him with that, could give him information about what the standard is requiring. And if you don't receive an answer, you can ask us.
Thank you, Raz. We'll take Eyal from the EU delegation, then Alon from Finland.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for these presentations. I think one of the main problems in dealing with standards in Israel is there's no one address. I mean, it's not that you contact someone and he helps you on many things. I mean, if you have a problem with health, you go to the Ministry of Health, and then and God knows if you know which department is it, and then you do the same with the Ministry of Agriculture, then you do the same with Ministry of Telecom. I think the government has to have one point which really can not, I wouldn't say control, but at least be a focal point for importers who just don't know whom to go to and where to start the process. EU member states can, of course, contact us. That's what they do. But others don't know whom to contact. And if you're not in Israel for many years, you're not experienced, you sometimes just give up. And I think this is a strong message that should go to everyone to have a focal point, not only for delivering, okay, thank you, I give it to the Ministry of Agriculture, but also for following up. And I think this is very important.
Good point. There's a new prime minister now who's very into cutting regulations. So Alexandra, you wanna comment on that?
Yeah, I want to repeat that, like in every country who is a part of a TBT agreement, who have the inquiry point, and this is their role to answer all the questions from all over the world on the questions of technical regulations. This is the own address, official address in the country for technical regulations and its drafts. And other focal point, again, I will say it, is the import division in our ministry, and his own role and its main role of this division, and to make all this process easier. the import process easier.
Right. And maybe for the next session, for the next forum, we'll also bring them as well. Alon, you wanted to ask something?
Yes, please. Hi. First of all, thanks. Can you hear me? Just
sure. Loud and clear.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. So a quick question on my end. So if there's, from time to time, we get all these import questions. So I usually try to, if there's a concrete import process, I always refer them to the Israeli importers, who anyhow is the legal entity that is liable for Israeli legislation, but also probably know the best. But one question that I do have is that in many cases we are trying to look for commercial entities contact us to get some understanding of the economic feasibility of doing that process, if they would like to start import to Israel. And for that, we usually trying to get an indication what regulations they will need to follow and what kind of changes, if so, they will need to invest in. So for that, I know that usually you will need to have a custom number. That is always the first phase, usually, in order to follow Tzav Yivui Ishi, the decree for import and everything else. And I know there's a pre-ruling system by the tax and custom authority, but it doesn't. The work there is not usually very effective. So my question is that: is there some recommendation or best practice you can recommend about how to get this freaking number? Thanks.
May I answer this question?
Sure.
Or you have a better answer from me, I don't know. Every customs, the customs has their own, it's called customs house. Okay, the official place of customs in each department of Israel, each part of Israel has its own customs house. In this house, the engineers of customs should provide this project for each importer, and on the base of technical details of the product, they state the customs number, customs position for the product. And this is the official answer that you get from customs.
Okay, all right. Raz, any comments on that, or maybe we can? Okay, so what I suggest, let's move forward. Alon, if I don't know if you got satisfied, but if not, maybe we can talk offline with us. But let's just move forward and go through Itai, and I want to introduce Itai. Going to spotlight for everybody. Itai, you can share your screen. You can share your presentation while I'm just introducing you. So Itai is a consultant that we work with. He's a very nice guy, and he's going to talk about the Israeli up-to-date wireless regulation. He's the CEO of Annexes Laboratories Ltd, and he's going to present himself and his in this subject. Thank you, Itai.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Itai, as been represented, and I am the owner and manager of Annexes. We are providing regulatory consultant services in Israel for the last 20 years. Such presentations are not my daily role, so I hope to succeed, and if I will succeed, my next position will be some kind of rock star or something. So let's begin. We are about to discuss about the telecom law and the changes in this telecom law. The official wireless, the telecom law in Israel is wireless telegraph ordinance, and from 1972. The last update was in 2018. The person that his signature is still appears on this law until today is a person that if he would be alive, he would supposed to be 119 years old, and he died already 30 years ago, roundabout. So this telecom law is not the most efficient and up-to-date by many means. What you should know about this telecom law is that the essence of it is that no one is allowed to possess, to install, or to operate any wireless station or any wireless device unless the license has been provided by the ministry. That means that everything is forbidden and need to be licensed. And then we should talk about exceptions. That is a essence of it, and that is, let's say, the basic problem. And from now, we should move on to see what's happened in the last years in this law. So the MOC, the Ministry of Communication, is dedicated and split the approach for some different categories. In one hand, those are the exempt products that we will discuss about the extended list in some minutes. And in the other hand, there are products that are supposed to be for governmental usage only. This is some kind of another nice word to say military tasks and security tasks only, and not allowed for civilian activities. So in between, there are two categories. Most of the products that will use what we called in English, in the best translation that I found, a suitability certificate. And this is the common daily products. And the other group is, let's say, more sophisticated, more delicate products, and that will need type approval. The main difference between those two categories, that suitability certificates will be provided to the products, but the company that will apply for this certificate is not interested for the ministry. That means nobody cares who are the owner, what is the goal of this application, and what they're going to do with it. In the other hand, there are type approval products that only licensed companies can apply for. And let's say those are radars for ships, wireless equipment for airplanes, and some sophisticated high-power products for daily life. But the common access points, receivers, wireless controllers for the vehicles, etc., all of those will gain suitability certificates. The cellular devices and cellular that are combined with another kind of technologies will be treated separately in another program that is dedicated for cellular activities. So as been said, most of the products that we are discuss and handle daily and by the ministry will be suitability certificate type of products. As been said before, everything previously needed to be certified. The first time that products become exempt was around about 3 years ago, and that the products were GPS products and Bluetooth products only. In the daily life, or from years to when we become more and more sophisticated, everything become wireless, and the ministry decided to reduce the level of demands for license. So in the last, let's say 2 years, they start to make a big revolution in the wireless department and how they approach for certificates and certifications. Until then, same group of products from one hand create the rules and the limitation, and in the same time, they were the people that handle the application and provide the certificates. And these two hats on the same people make a lot of problems and a lot of inconsistency. So they divide the wireless wing for two separate departments, one group of people that create the rules and standards, and the other group of people that receive the applications and provide the certificates upon the rules that the other group provide. And that makes things more fluent and more consistent. The ministry have some kind of regulation files that supposed to provide the allocation, the frequency allocation table, and how the ministry treats the different technologies. This file was 3, 4, 5 pages document until recently, until 2018, and in this revolution that happened in the last 2 years, they create a full comprehensive file that contain a lot of frequency bands in this new published allocation table and how the new technologies are treated. In fact, this allocation table was in use during the years, but not published. So it was not something that someone was able to rely on officially. And also during this change, they prepared extended list of exempt products, and that's been published lately. So in most cases, as Alexandra mentioned before, Israel and also the Ministry of Communication is part of it, follows the EU regulation, and the EU regulation for telecommunication is what we call separate 70-03. This is a Bible of frequency allocation table and allowed technologies for the EU. We are following this Bible. Surely because we are in Israel, we are not most up to date in the last version, and we have to digest the new updates for several months or more. So might be that changes are happening in this EU document that will be adopted in Israel after a few months or after a few years. And surely, because Israel is not a part of the EU and we have our own limitations, some of the changes in this recommendation book will not be adopted by Israel. I would like to concentrate or to raise some specific topics in this point. The LoRa technology, or what officially called LoRa-1 technology, this is a relatively new technology that Israel had a problem to adopt because the normal frequencies that are used in other parts of the world cannot be used in Israel. So special agreement with the LoRa-1 commission been raised, and nowadays we have a special band for Israel for 917 to 920 megahertz, and this is part of the new official publication in Israel, and that is a good idea or good news. And now we are able to use LoRa in Israel, surely in this special band. Second thing that it is special and need to be discussed separately is the UHF RFID technology and also the smart home technology. Israel dedicated a special band for it, a relatively narrow one with special parameters, between 915 to 917 megahertz. Other topic that I would like to raise is that in Israel, the 5 gigahertz subbands, most of it are closed for outdoor, and this is different from the EU, and that's make life of the manufacturer a bit complicated for outdoor products, so need to be taken care for. We're supposed to have some kind of relief in the last changes, but due to some kind of legal problems and how to reach the regulations as with free access, while it is, let's say, documents that are got rights and cannot be published in the website of the ministry. The change has been postponed for the moment until 1st of October, but nobody knows whether in the 1st of October they will find a solution how to use the standards without violation of privacy. And the last topic that I would like to raise in this point is that we have some technologies that are related to US vehicles in specific frequencies that are not used in the EU, but only in the US. So those frequencies of 314, 315, and 325 megahertz, we control them by the FCC demands and the FCC reports.
Itai, I'm just gonna say that we're mindful on time, so if you can start pushing forward, that would be great.
Yes, very important slide, so it's important to
okay. I'm going to speak about the elephant in the room. That means extended list of exempt products. So as since last 3 months ago, the new exempt list, the list of exempt products has been published. And beside of the Bluetooth and GPS that already been used, been exempt as technologies, Israel published a list of products that are exempt as products. That means nobody cares what technology is used on those products. As long as it is, those are the products, they are exempt. That means those are keyboards, mouse, computer monitors, tablet computers, laptops and notebooks, and you will see in the next part of the list also desktop computers. Now I would like to emphasize that this is not things like, it means if those are keyboards and mice, things like a camera for a computer that is not part of the list, that means it is not exempt. The list is a closed specific products. Beside of that, there are video streamers and set-top box and smartwatch and vacuum cleaners also. Be aware that products from those kinds that are combined with cellular capabilities are not part of this list, and they will treat as cellular product. And this is another program that if somebody would like to ask me about separately, I will be able to discuss with him. You probably will get my email and phone number, and if anything else will be interesting somebody, I will be more than happy to answer. So about this communication law and the exempt products, I'm happy to answer here any question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's not a, hi, let me take it away to the general group. Once again, can you just unshare?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let me try to unpin you once again. Okay, here we go. So thank you, Ty. Thank you. It's not an easy subject, and obviously there's a lot of details and a lot of technical issues. So it's definitely not an easy one, but it was important to show the different aspects that came to life not recently. So yeah, so we're basically concluded we want to keep it on time, want to do 1 hour, and that's it. And but if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or ask them now. Otherwise, we will just be available for you offline. So the idea of this forum is basically to provide you with some insight and information. Some of them even a little bit technical. I know that the majority of people here are diplomats and they're not into the techniques of those things, but it's really important for you to understand who's what has been changed, because I know that you're receiving a lot of questions from companies. And also, you have now contact details of some people, so when you have any issue, you can definitely refer some questions to them. As well as you can always approach us. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce is really the kind of like a buffer between the government and the private sector, and we're really helping a lot of embassies with their questions and either referring them or trying to help them on our own. Whether it's this, whether it's market information, whether it's a credit report, lists of companies, and of course, all the relevant interaction with the international division, which is basically on the trade side. So really feel free to contact us anytime. We'll share the presentation and the recording, as I mentioned, also the contact details of all the speakers, so you have it. And if you have any other questions, then you can feel free to shoot away. So if there's none now, I'm just going to ask Raz, Alexander, and Itai, if you have any other last comment that you want to say, then please feel free. And if not, that's also okay. I would like to thank you all. Alexandra, Itai, Raz, thank you very much for your time and for your insights and for the presentations. And thank you, Sharon, again for organizing, and thanks for all the commercial consulars and ambassadors and representatives of different embassies here in Israel of joining us. It's really good to see you again. So thank you very much, and have a very good week.
Thank you.